What's going on, everybody? This is Owen from Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time of day it is, wherever you're listening. I thank you all for tuning in today to episode number 20 of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. I am very pleased to say that we have made it to 20 episodes. It is hard to believe, but 20 episodes. I thank you all of you consistent listeners, all of you new listeners. Welcome to the program. But all of those who have been here since day one, I thank you so much. It wouldn't be possible without you guys. I'm really proud of the progress the show has made in this time, and I really look forward to the future of this show. So episode 20, here we are. You guys are probably wondering what the topic is, and today we will be covering Led Zeppelin's third album. So Led Zeppelin 3, released in 1970. Led Zeppelin is a band that I have covered here in the past. You can check out my thoughts on Led Zeppelin's first two albums in episode 1, the first episode of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, where I talked about Led Zeppelin's debut album, as well as episode 16 of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, where I talked about Led Zeppelin's sophomore attempt, Led Zeppelin 2. So you can hear both of my thoughts to both of those separate albums wherever you get your podcast, wherever you listen to Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast. Episode 1 and episode 16 was the episode number. So we look now to Led Zeppelin 3 as the band comes off those first two albums. They go through kind of a metamorphosis in the production of this third album, a change, so to speak. More mellow sound, it's different. The band is able to expand their sound, and they're eager for change on this third album. Coming off of a really blues-focused first album where they're kind of showing their influence and really flexing kind of their muscle in the blues realm. And then Led Zeppelin 2, where they really showcase their hard rock ability in my eyes, and they really kind of set themselves apart from other bands on the scene. And I think it's really Led Zeppelin 2, if you look at it, is a really consequential album in their library. Led Zeppelin 3, at the time of release, comes to mixed reception, especially from the critics. But over time, it has matured into a classic Led Zeppelin album, as most Led Zeppelin albums have. They're a very album-driven band, so they're very album-oriented. So the whole album is oftentimes bigger than individual songs. And Led Zeppelin 3 is a very strong album. Maybe not strong in terms of strength, in terms of like heaviness, but it still is definitely a valid album altogether. It definitely is more mellow and acoustic in sound, but that does not detract from it. So we start off, Zeppelin, like I mentioned, they come off their first two albums. The band is really kind of beginning to make a name for themselves, beginning to really kind of ascend to stardom. I mean, they really begin to make that ascension with their first album, in Led Zeppelin 3, is really them taking a new approach to kind of see how the fans and the critics kind of respond. But yeah, the whole recording process for this album, it takes place at a place called Braun Yr. That's a cottage. No electricity, I believe no running water, but I could be wrong. But it's a cottage in Europe, and that is where a lot of the material for the album was written. And that influences a lot of the sound and a lot of the change in tone that we hear come through on this album. So yeah, the band hanging out at this cottage, and new inspiration strikes, and just a new sound is delivered to the public. So, as we normally do here on Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, we go into a track-by-track breakdown of the album. So we have kind of a track-by-track look. We'll talk about each track individually. I'll share my brief thoughts. And then at the end, I will give a broad overview, and I will score the album out of 10. So let's get into it. So we start off Led Zeppelin 3 with Immigrant Song. Immigrant Song is one of their more popular songs. As I said earlier on, Led Zeppelin is a very album-driven band. The album is oftentimes bigger than any particular song. But this was not the case with Immigrant Song. Immigrant Song was one of their more successful singles. It was one of the songs that charted, I believe, up to number 16 on the Billboard charts. So that was big for Zeppelin because, as I mentioned, their albums were what got the attention. Oftentimes, singles didn't get as much attention because, they were more focused on the album as a whole. And that's, I think, is kind of a trend that you could generally say carried over to most of rock, beyond just Led Zeppelin. But if we look at Immigrant Song specifically, as I mentioned, this album is more mellow. There's more acoustic music played on this album. But Immigrant Song is the exception to that. It is raucous. It is in your face. Most people know Immigrant Song. It's been featured in various moments in pop culture. Off the top of my head, Thor Ragnarok, as well as School of Rock. So those are two instances where it's been featured in film, but everybody should know ba-boom, ba-ba-da-boom, ba-boom, ba-ba-da-boom, ba-boom, ba-ba-da-boom, ba-boom. Ah. Immigrant Song is a classic. It's one of Led Zeppelin's finest pieces, and it's really an energetic piece. Just when you think about that opening riff, key of F sharp, the drum beat that we got going on underneath it all, and even down to the lyrical content, what we're talking about, what Robert is singing about, talking about Vikings on some sort of voyage across the sea, and you get this just magnificent imagery into your head, and it's really a fantastic song. But yeah, it's one of their most popular singles, and it's made several features in pop culture. I think Immigrant Song is... It's funny because when you look at the album Led Zeppelin 3 as a whole, most Led Zeppelin fans would say, well, this is kind of a different sound from the first two albums, and certainly from some of their other albums. This is where the band tries to do something different. They get in the lab and they try to do something different. But when you look at Immigrant Song, it's like, oh yeah, that's one of Led Zeppelin's best. That fits right in with the rest of their catalog. So I think it's funny how it might not be the song to define the album, but if someone were to point out that as the finest song on the album, I wouldn't disagree. But Immigrant Song is definitely it's in your face. It's a hard rock song, and for the time, 1970, you think about when contextually, in terms of what's going on in music, things are starting to get heavier. 1970, we have a band like Black Sabbath releasing their first album. So Immigrant Song, I think, is another sort of transition into that heavy metal period that we start to see. So we move on now into track number 2, a track that goes by the title Friends. And this is where the acoustic kind of theme starts to come in. If I can remember correctly, I believe the melody it's a really open strumming pattern. I believe it's C6 or C9 tuning, but it was interestingly enough, a tuning that Jimmy Page just kind of made up. But it's ba-dum, ba-dum, and kind of this interesting little melody that we have behind it. Ba-dum, ba-dum, dum, ba-dum, dum, ba-dum, dum, dum, dum. And I just love the way that his guitar tone sounds. I love the way that the music shifts through it. And yeah, I think the arrangement, there was a string arrangement that is in the background and just kind of that falls behind the vocals, and that is over top of Jimmy Page's guitar line, and that string arrangement is arranged by John Paul Jones, who, as we, from the first two albums, bass, keyboard, and on this album, he really strengthens his multi-instrument ability, and here, showcasing his ability to make an arrangement for a string section. It really shows how John Paul Jones is probably one of the most underrated members in Led Zeppelin, because most people, Robert Plant, his voice, definitely impressive, definitely notable in rock history. Jimmy Page, definitely one of the finer rock guitarists of all time. John Bonham, as we talked about in last week's episode, is widely regarded as one of the finest drummers in rock history. But John Paul Jones is kind of overlooked. He's not always the first one that comes to mind. And I don't even think that's a John Paul Jones problem. I think that's more of a bass player thing. I think that's a common trend you'd find among bass players. But Friends is a definite strong example of John Paul Jones showcasing how he can contribute to a track beyond just the bass, adding that string arrangement. And in other tracks that we've covered in the past, off the top of my head. The title is slipping. It's slipping. Give me 1 second. It's going to come to me. Your Time Is Gonna Come. That organ intro played by John Paul Jones. That is another example of his multi-instrument ability and how it enriches Zeppelin's sound and how it adds dynamics to what they're doing. So this is really a turning point for the band, this track, because if you're listening to the album in order, this is really one of the instances where a song is acoustic throughout. So, the band just kind of is changing. This is a metamorphosis period for them. This album is a point of change. It's a point of introducing new ideas and attempting new things. So I really like the way the vocals come through here too. There's kind of this chorus effect going on. We got a little and that's just it's an eeriness tone to it almost, but blended with the string arrangement and the way those vocals just kind of add a warmth sound around it, and Jimmy Page just playing that guitar melody, it really blends together to a new sound for Zeppelin at the time, but it's definitely something that is unique, and it's something that's interesting. It's something it catches my ear, and I think it catches many other listeners' ears as well. So moving in now to track number 3, we have Celebration Day, and something that I'm going to say again later in this episode, but underrated Led Zeppelin song, and I think Celebration Day is one of those underrated songs. And I think this whole album, when we look at the grand scheme of things, when people talk about their favorite Led Zeppelin albums, the 4th album, Untitled, that comes to mind. The 2nd album comes to mind. Physical Graffiti, the 1st album, those are ones that really come to mind. Maybe Houses of the Holy as well. But I think Zeppelin 3 is something that people look at as, it's good. It has its benefits, but maybe as an album it's not the finest. But I think because it gets overlooked, some of these tracks, also get kind of slept on in the grand scheme of things in the Zeppelin community. And I think Celebration Day is unfortunately one of those songs where people they overlook it for one reason or another. But I really like the transition in from Friends, kind of this drone effect that we get into this kind of slide guitar, kind of just rhythm sounding dealio we got going on in the beginning of Celebration Day. And I like the lyrics too, how just kind of crisp they sound and how audible they are and how clear and just present they are. But based on the little research I did going into this episode, the lyrics reflect on Robert's first impressions with New York City and kind of adjusting to that, which makes sense too, because if you think of where the band is at this point in their career, it's 1970, so they're about 2 years into it. Maybe at this point, I'm not sure if they've made their first trip to the States yet, although I believe they had, so that's kind of they're, this little band from the UK, and now they're starting to branch out, across the pond to the United States, because that is really where their music hits big. That's really what helps Zeppelin become the band that they are today, their popularity in America. So having a track that reflects on these new experiences in the United States, in a big city, in a global city like New York City, totally makes sense for lyrical content on this album. I think this guitar solo that we have going on, it's got tremendous feel to it. And I think, Jimmy Page, we talk about his solos a lot, and his, everybody's kind of got their own opinion. I've heard some describe Jimmy Page, as an absolute virtuoso. He does all these things so well, but then I've heard others say, well, when it comes to his soloing, it's really it's like slop. He's just kind of fingering around. Whatever the case may be, wherever you sit on the fence of that, I think whatever he's doing technically speaking, I think what it sounds just to the plain ear and to, the layman, I think it still comes across as, this is something good. It may not be the finest, gourmet solo, but I think it's still something that the average listener can still take value out of that and still say, yes, that deserves to be appreciated. And I think Celebration Day is an example of that. And there are definitely going to be other tracks in this episode that we're going to talk about that Jimmy's solo shines through and is, in the grand scheme of all Led Zeppelin solos, some of my favorite Jimmy Page solos, some that come to mind: Fool in the Rain, Heartbreaker, Solos like those, there are solos on this album that are just as good, but they oftentimes get overlooked. Some not as much as others. But I think Celebration Day is one of those. And reflecting back to another point, John Paul Jones, his performance on that, because when you have a solo and you have all this other stuff going on, John Paul Jones, as the bass guitarist, along with John Bonham, are the backbone of the band. And I think the bass sound underneath is terrific, and it's something that you kind of have to listen to, and that's the case, I think, with a lot of bands. The bass, it's not immediately present, and the listener may be hearing the bass, but they might not even be realizing that, oh, this is the bass I'm listening to. So I think the bass deserves some recognition on this track as well as the solo. And overall, I said it's kind of an underrated track. And I just love kind of the rising feel we get in the intro from that guitar pattern. And I think it just kind of, you feel like you're taking off almost, like, here we go. And then, boom, the track takes off. So moving on now into track number 4 on the album, we have one of the most famous songs from the album. Obviously, the opener to the album, Immigrant Song, is probably the most famous. That's definitely backed up by numbers. I mean, you just look at Spotify streams. It's by a lot, Immigrant Song. So it's a wide gap. But this song here is the second most played on Spotify and is probably the second most popular of all of these songs, and that is Since I've Been Loving You. Now, it's a take on a blues classic, and the song is bluesy. This is Zeppelin. This is Zeppelin's core. So the blues is something that's going to stay with Zeppelin through their entire career, and I just love that opening little riff. Zum dum 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 boom, dum boom boom, and something you notice, and really it takes a keen ear to listen to, but over time it's kind of been pointed out and it's kind of been turned into a joke. But John Bonham's squeaky bass pedal, it's very subtle, and you really have to listen to it, and it can be hard to hear. But if you listen to in the opening, you can hear the squeak of the pedal. And there are other tracks where you can hear the squeak. The Ocean is one that comes to mind off the top of my head. There's some other interesting things you can hear in the Ocean as well, such as a phone ringing, and just those little things I love to listen to and just try to find while dissecting the track. But that squeaky bass pedal is really just a testament of the time. We got to think, this was recorded in 1970. The production quality, the equipment, it might not have been the finest, and they're recording on physical tape, so the takes that they can do are limited, and it's not all digitally compressed, so they're renting the space. It's a testament of the time, the squeaky pedal. It's a reminder that this was something that was made in 1970, at this point over 50 years ago. So it's a reminder that, hey, this is something that's dated a little bit, and I think that squeaky bass pedal dates the album. But the blues passages that Page is really just expressing himself, and he's playing through, it's extraordinary, and they're very extended, and they're open, and it's oozes the blues. It's a bluesy track. It's Zeppelin flexing their muscle at doing what they do best, doing what they've done since their origin, doing what they've done since the jump. It's tremendous, and it's a lengthier track. It tops 7 minutes, which, depending on what genre of music you listen to, that's either, it's only 7 minutes. I mean, if you're a Pink Floyd fan, 7 minutes, shit, that's nothing. Or heavy metal acts oftentimes can go on and on. So, but if you're a fan of pop music, 7 minutes, that's crazy. That's ridiculous, But it is a longer track, but that is kind of a testament of the time, because blues was very popular leading up to that period, and Zeppelin kind of carries that on and carries that influence forward, and kind of open passages with soloing and just expression. That is a trademark of the blues, as well as jazz music as well. That's also something that you see in those two genres a lot. So the track is a live staple. It became a live staple. It became a spot, speaking on the track length, when they would do it live, they would extend it for even longer periods of time where they could really just showcase their musical talent on stage. And they did this with many other songs. Off the first album, Dazed and Confused would be one where they would just open it up. Jimmy Page would get the bow out. You listen to Led Zeppelin live albums, they have tracks that are going to go 20 minutes. And I think that's a very rare quality that not many bands can do. Just not even that, many bands probably don't have the desire to do that, but some just don't. They just can't do it like Zeppelin can. And that's another reason why Zeppelin is one of the all-time greats. But the solo is highly praised. I believe I've seen lists from groups like Rolling Stone and maybe Guitar World ranking this as one of the best rock guitar solos of all time. So Jimmy Page really is pouring himself out here. I think he really showcased his ability as a guitar player. I think he really takes a big step forward with this album, not just as a guitar player, but he also serves as a producer, and he also is a big compositional guy. So I think Jimmy Page's talent and his knowledge and his ability is not limited to just the guitar, but it's definitely showcased on the guitar in Since I've Been Loving You. But the song is really stretched out, and I think there's that moment where the drums drop out and Robert's really just wailing on the vocals, and it's very, very similar to blues styles of music, and it's very similar to the bands that Zeppelin was influenced by, and I think it's really neat to see that influence carried over into Zeppelin's style. And I think it's something that they're very talented with it, and it's not necessarily unique, but it's done in a unique way. It's done in Zeppelin's way, which I think makes it unique in a way. It's maybe not original, but it's done in a unique style. It's done in a different way, and it's done in a way that time has certainly told that it's significant, and the amount of times it's been played over and over again has shown that Zeppelin's way and Zeppelin's interpretation is significant, and it is good. So, but this just showcases the band's blues ability, the band's ability to play a longer, stretched out track, not only in the studio, but on the live stage as well. And it just showcases their musical ability. So we transition now to track 5. This closes out side 1 of the album, and that is Out on the Tiles. Now I'm going to pause. Well, I'm not going to pause, but I'm going to just have a little aside here to tell a little story about my friend John and I. In high school, Out on the Tiles was a song that we both learned. He's a drummer, as you would know if you listened to last week's episode number 19, conversation with drummers about drummers. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. But friend John, drum set player, I played the guitar. So Out on the Tiles, we thought it sounded cool. I learned the riff. He learned the drum part. And it was something we jammed over once. So in high school, that was kind of our song. We would joke about it. And by no means is it like on the level of Black Dog or Whole Lotta Love or Stairway to Heaven. It's not in terms of popularity or even in terms of difficulty, but it's a fun song. It's written by none other than, that was a mouthful, John Henry Bonham, the man behind the kit. And the title, Out on the Tiles, it refers to just going out on the bars, just going out to the bars, getting drunk, which John Bonham was no stranger to. But yeah, I just thought that, it was funny. And every time I hear this song or I see this song, I think about my friend John, and I think about those times in high school when we would just joke around about this song, Out on the Tiles. And, then other people, they try to play Out on the Tiles, which, just as a note, that drum part is no easy task. John Bonham's got that double bass thing going on. Well, it's no double bass because there's not two beaters, and there's not two bass drums. That wasn't really a thing at the time. But he's got that double beat kind of going on with one foot, and it's definitely impressive. And from my perspective, it's hard to replicate. I'm sure more seasoned drum set players, I'm sure it's a drop in the hat, but Me, who's very, very novice at drum set, can hardly play a rock beat, but the double bass thing, the double beat thing, we'll call it, that is impressive to me. But the riff is pretty nice. Do 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 do. It's pretty straightforward. This track, I've talked about solos and Celebration Day, and Since I've Been Loving You, the last two tracks. This track, Jimmy Page takes a break on the solo. There is no solo on Out on the Tiles. Another reason why it was nice to learn. But it's one of the first Zeppelin tracks I learned. I remember going to my guitar teacher, Marty Owens, and just saying, oh yeah, like, I want to learn Out on the Tiles, and, that was it. But I do have kind of a close relationship, and I have a good connection with this song, and it's just kind of a song that most fans might just kind of look over and not think much of, but I'm a fan of it. Alternate versions of this track, there is Jimmy Page live at the Greek with the Black Crowes. I like that version a lot, and I believe there was a demo version that John showed me in high school, but I can't put my tongue on it. And then there is the instrumental version from the Deluxe edition that's entitled Bathroom Sound. So that's just Out on the Tiles without the vocals. But do check out the Led Zeppelin 3 Deluxe edition. It's on Spotify and most streaming platforms. It was released, I believe, in 2014, and it's just got some cool behind-the-scenes stuff, some rough mixes, and some different tracks that they hadn't officially released yet. But Out on the Tiles, similar to Immigrant Song, is just that straightforward rock kind of. There's no acoustic passages in Out on the Tiles, which differs from Friends, and then Celebration Day's got its thing going on, and Since I've Been Loving You is a very extended blues song, so more kind of classic Zeppelin. But Out on the Tiles, kind of like Immigrant Song, is more hard rock, and it's more in your face, and it's more, something to take note of. It's more what you would think of when Led Zeppelin comes to mind. But that is going to do it for side one, and we are going to take a break for a word from our sponsor. All right, welcome back, everybody. This is Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, episode number 20. Today we are talking about Led Zeppelin's third album, entitled Led Zeppelin 3. We left off talking about the end of side one, track Out on the Tiles, and then we took a break for commercial, and we are back now to talk about side two of the album and finish up with my final thoughts and a review and a score out of 10. So we switch now to track number, I believe it is 6. Let me just check. Yes, track 6. So that is Gallows Pull. This is a tremendous Led Zeppelin song. I believe this one you could also describe as underrated. We described some songs earlier as underrated, such as Celebration Day. I think underrated would be a key term that you could use to describe the entire album. But Gallows Pull is definitely an underrated song, in my opinion. So Gallows Pull, from my perspective, is about someone being hung. The gallows, kind of death row, the pull, that kind of speaks for itself. But it is another acoustic-centered track. I don't know if I would say it's acoustic-centered, but it has flares of acoustics in it for sure, which is another theme of this album, where they increased use of acoustic guitar and other kind of creative instrumentation is a branch out from what Zeppelin had done previously on their first two albums. But there is electric guitar in here as well. There's also a banjo part underneath all of this, so definitely getting creative with the string sections and the arrangements. That's a common theme, and Gallows Poll is another example of that being carried over throughout the album. This is based on an older folk song, so it's more of a traditional take on that. Let me see if I can get. So it is adapted from the version of an American folk musician, Fred Gerlich, which was included on his 1962 12-string guitar album for Folkways Records. So this is Robert Plant and Jimmy Page doing a take on an old folk song, which is nothing new for Led Zeppelin, especially If you look at some of their earlier content, blues-based material, I believe Since I've Been Loving You could also fall under that cover, or under that category, rather. But Zeppelin is very influenced, and they take those influence, and it shows up in their music quite frequently. Another thing I like about the Gallows Poll is the way that it builds. So, similar to how Celebration Day, builds throughout the track, Gallows Pull towards the end, it's just reminiscent and just kind of has that groove of just kind of like being real communal, being really jolly and happy around a group of people, and you're just swinging from the gallows pole. And I like the little choral vocal effects we have going in towards the end. Down. And then Robert is kind of ad-libbing the vocal parts. And it's overall, by the end, you'll probably be, grooving right along. The song is very groovy. It's got a very upbeat kind of feel as we move along, and kind of a chugging almost. Not like chugging in the metal sense, but it's just kind of like that's the kind of pattern and rhythm that begins to be voiced out into further on down the track. So coming out of Gallows Poll, we move on to track 7, or track 2 of side B, and that would be Tangerine. So this is a very acoustic sounding track. It's very, it's kind of basic. It also has a minor sound to it, so it's very kind of depressing sounding at the beginning. Something that surprised me about this track when I was listening through the album and I was looking at the numbers via Spotify, because that is my preferred streaming service, Spotify, but this was a very highly streamed song, I believe third highest on the whole album. So it was Immigrant Song, Since I've Been Loving You, and then Tangerine, which definitely is not a song that most casual Led Zeppelin fans are going to jump to. Oh, Tangerine, that is my song. But I think the more, the hardcore Led Zeppelin fans definitely understand Tangerine, and they know Tangerine, and they definitely appreciate it. But I think it can easily be overlooked. So I was kind of surprised to see it have such high marks in the number of streams. But Tangerine, it's got that nice little, I compared it to a minor sounding guitar opening, but I believe Jimmy Page is doing some alternate tuning once again here. But I think the acoustic guitar usage with kind of different chord progressions and different tunings really shows Zeppelin increasing their intelligence and increasing their ability to try new things, and it's really expanding their horizons, which at the end of the day ends up being a good thing. The song Tangerine was carried over from Jimmy Page's days in the Yardbirds, and if you recall, that is how Led Zeppelin originated. They originated as the New Yardbirds. So Jimmy Page's time in the Yardbirds was definitely influential on himself and the trajectory of Led Zeppelin and kind of where they wanted to go. But the earlier version from the Yardbirds, recorded in 1968, was titled Knowing That I'm Losing You. And then it's kind of changed to Tangerine. So, Tangerine, Tangerine. I think, my little vocal performance there sounds nothing like Robert Plant. I think that is, I've gone on about the guitar part and the creativity and the ingenuity, but I think Robert's vocals really start to shine through, because I think if you look at the first album, Robert sounds good. If you look at a track like Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, his vocals can really shine through. And then I think if you look on the second album, a song like Thank You or What Is and What Should Never Be, his vocals really shine through as more so than just, screams or anything like that, or just his passion, but it's his vocal talent. I think Tangerine is another song similar to those other two that I mentioned, where on this album he's singing, it's not like wailing or anything like that, and his vocal talent, his ability is shining through here. So it kind of starts out with this sad sounding opening, but it transitions into a positive sound And I think Robert's vocals really help uplift that kind of that feeling, that mood that the song makes you feel. But the lyrics, looking at that from a lyrical perspective, they focus on lost love, someone who's missing out on someone they were once had a close relationship with, and, love is definitely a big theme in not just Led Zeppelin's catalog, but a lot of rock music, especially around this time. So that's not too surprising of lyrical content. But the solo I really like in regards to the bends at the opening. I really like those. And I think the solo kind of, it takes off, which is another kind of musical theme that we've kind of been noticing, and I've been noticing throughout this episode, of the feeling of the music lifting up and kind of ascension, and just that kind of the way the notes move and the line seems to just ascend. And I think the solo kind of definitely pushes in that direction, and the bends help to do that. And then we get to Robert's line where it kind of drops out and he just says, "And I do." And then we lead right into that solo. It's beautiful. Whenever I listen to it, I always listen to that 3 words, "and I do," from Robert Plant. So if you're not familiar with Tangerine, I think it's a really beautiful song, and I think it's definitely a very solid track on the second side. So yeah, this is a solid track. It's not extremely long, only 3 minutes and 12 seconds, which I know Led Zeppelin sometimes is known for their longer tracks, but 3 minutes 12 seconds, certainly not that long of a track, but they still can pack so much into such a short song. So we move on now to track 8, or track 3 on side 2, and that is "That's the Way," 5 minutes and 38 seconds in length, written by Jimmy Page and Robert Plant. From my perspective, the lyrics focus on clashes in a relationship. I think this might... Excuse me. I'm going to get a drink of water here. I think that might be something that's open for interpretation. Maybe I'm a little off in that interpretation, but let me pull up the "That's the Way" lyrics, and I'll point to the part where I think that, this is where I draw the lyrical content. So this one, opposite from Tangerine, kind of starts off with a more positive sounding opening line, probably in a major key, versus Tangerine, which is likely in a minor key. I'm no expert on music theory, so if I get that wrong, don't come after me, but let me know, because I'd like to know. But the opening lyrics to "That's the Way," "I don't know how I'm gonna tell you, I can't play with you no more." And when I hear that line, "I can't play with you no more," I assumed that that's talking about a relationship. I can't be with you. I don't know how I'm going to tell you. My feelings for you are so strong, but I don't want to break your heart, because I don't have those same feelings anymore. But upon some further reading, I guess some have lengthened or linked the lyrics to being about a friendship, which I guess the next lines kind of reveal to us. "I don't know how I'm going to do what mama told me, my friend, the girl next door. I can't believe what people saying, you're going to let your hair hang down. I'm satisfied to sit here working all day long. You're in the darker side of town." So I think it's kind of maybe a relationship budding in the process. Maybe this narrator, this person whose point of view the lyrics are from, sees this person who has later in the song, "And yesterday I saw you standing by the river, and weren't those tears that filled your eyes, and all the fish that lay in dirty water dying, had they got you hypnotized?" And then in the following verse, "Yesterday I saw you kissing tiny flowers, but all that lives is born to die. And so I say to you that nothing really matters, and all you do is stand and cry." So the meaning of this song I can't exactly extract. I think, it definitely kind of has some... It's an emotional... There's emotion being expressed in the lyrics, that's clear, but I think that's a pretty basic statement. You could say that about a lot of different things, but that's the way it ought to be. But I think there's some kind of tension. Something is, some kind of emotional episode is happening, and that's, I think, where the title comes in. That's the way it ought to be. And that's the way it ought to stay. And it's dealing with the difficulty of whether it's a breakup or the end of a friendship or something like that. But this is another acoustic track, another one where they kind of showcase their strength and their ability to play beyond just, blues and hard rock. They can play softer acoustic-based tracks as well, which I think is definitely something that is noteworthy, and I think it shows their range as artists. And that is a theme of this album, as I have mentioned. So this is another track that just fits right in with the whole kind of almost concept for the album, but this is by no means a concept album, I would say. The song really does not have drums or bass either, so this really is a showcase of Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, who spent their time in Braun Yr, the cottage in Europe that had just kind of bare bones, no electricity, very basic, which really was an inspiration and really just kind of where a lot of this material originated from. And I think that's kind of, that shines through on here. Okay, so we move on now to our next track, Braun Yr Stomp. So, Braun Yr, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, but as I just mentioned, was the name of the cottage where this whole album kind of originated from. A lot of songwriting was done there. A lot of the creative process began at Braun Yr. But Braun Yr Stomp, not to be confused with Braun Yr, the track that was later used on Physical Graffiti and is an instrumental, but Braun Yr Stomp has the spirit, it's got the rhythm, and it's got the vibe for sure. This is an underrated song, I think, and I say underrated when most Led Zeppelin fans probably know this song, they're probably fans of this, but I think what I think of is, are you going to turn on rock radio and hear this song? Probably not. You're more likely to hear Heartbreaker or Black Dog or anything like that. When Braun Yr Stomp, it's different from those songs, but I think it's just as good. This is a certified classic, in my opinion. It's got great energy. And the live version that is used on How the West Was Won, the way the crowd starts clapping, and Zeppelin live is just so much more in depth than what they do in the studio, and the performances just go on for so much longer, and they really just showcase their talent. And Braun Yr Stomp, the How the West Was Won version, really showcases that ability. I like the strumming pattern. There's the usage of castanets and spoons, played by John Bonham. And then if you check out the Deluxe edition on Spotify, which was released in 2014. I believe it's on other platforms other than Spotify, but that's just my go-to. Jennings Farm Blues, that is the electric instrumental for Braun Yr Stomp. That is kind of the Braun Yr Stomp work in progress, so to speak. But it's really something fun where you can clap along to or stomp your foot to, and it's got good energy, and it really just kind of feels like you're having a hoedown, you're getting down and going to do some square dancing. It's not a country song, but I could definitely see how there's some country influence in there. This is an overall just fun track, and it's a great way to kind of put towards the back of the album. And now we switch now to the closer on the album, track 10, or track 5 of side 2, however you choose to look at it, and this is entitled Hats Off to Roy Harper. This song is just kind of weird, I'm not going to lie to you. We've got some different vocal effects, Jimmy's usage of slide guitar, Robert's voice is going through a modifier here. There's this whole fade-in effect, which it's interesting, it's fun to listen to, and I can only imagine what that was like at the time, because you have to put all of this music into context. In 1970, some of these things they're doing instrumentally are kind of new. It's not mainstream. So the song is named after folk singer Roy Harper. So folk music. I'm going to say folk music. Folk music definitely has its grips on this album. I mean, they have a song here in Hats Off to Roy Harper dedicated to a folk singer named Roy Harper. Songs like Gallows Pull, that's a take on a folk song, The whole acoustic usage, that kind of brings to mind folk traits, folk imagery. So this song, it's nothing great. It's a blues track, folk blues. You got the slide guitar there. There's this neat vocal effects for Robert Plant, but I think it does kind of showcase their blues roots as well. 3 minutes and 41 seconds. It's not extraordinarily long, and I don't think it really adds too much to the album. I don't think it detracts too much from the album. I think it's just kind of there at the end of the day. So, hats off to Roy Harper. It's a song I'll listen to, but very rarely am I going to find myself queuing up hats off to Roy Harper. Like, I need to hear this right now. Although, there may have been a time when that was the case. So, 10 tracks, 43 minutes and 4 seconds in length. Released in October of 1970 to actually kind of mixed reviews. So if we look back at the reviews, it was a highly anticipated album, excuse me, as Led Zeppelin was beginning to make a name for themselves. And there was high anticipation. People were ready for it. They were advance ordering this album. There were close to 1 million advanced orders on this. But yeah, it kind of flops. It flops because I think they do something different that people were not expecting. And it comes under a lot of criticism. And then as a result, there's lower sales at the time of release. But over time, it recovers and it becomes, kind of a underrated album, so to speak, in their catalog. And it does become certified 2 times platinum in 1990 and in 1999 6 times platinum. And the 2014 reissue, the deluxe edition with tracks like Jennings Farm Blues and Bathroom Sound and other sort of rough mixes and work in progresses of some of the finished product, that helps get the album into the Billboard Top 10. So if we look at some professional reviews from some professional reviewers, the Rolling Stone Album Guide gives it 4 stars out of 5. Encyclopedia of Popular Music, 4 stars out of 5. The Great Rock Discography, 9 out of 10. So, over time, the reviews improve, but at the time of release, definitely some criticism, definitely some mixed reviews, and I think that's because Zeppelin was willing to do something different, and I think that kind of caught people off guard. But we'll see in the 4th album how they kind of just say, we don't care about the critics. We're going to do it our way. And the 4th album, that will be covered for sure. That's my favorite Led Zeppelin album, but that'll be covered down the line. I don't have a specific date for that yet, but be sure to keep an eye out for that one. Led Zeppelin has been the band I've been covering since the beginning of this show, and they will be consistent throughout the show. But those are thoughts of other people. Here are my thoughts on the album. You've probably gathered on it, but I'll just kind of read what I wrote here today. So, at the time of release, Led Zeppelin 3 received criticism from many, as it had a new approach and sound from Led Zeppelin. As time wore on, the album grew into a classic. Tracks such as Immigrant Song, Since I've Been Loving You, and Braun Yr Stomp defined the album. An important part of Led Zeppelin's catalog, all in all, Led Zeppelin 3 definitely has its place in rock and roll history as a band trying something new and over time being rewarded for it and, not backing down, even if at the time criticism was common for this album. So if I were to give this album a rating out of 10, I would give it a 9 out of 10. I've definitely given some 10s out here in the past. I just don't feel that this album has large enough of an impact to score a 9 out of 10, or a 10 out of 10 rather. That's why I will give it a 9, because I think it is good enough. But yeah, that is about all I have for you folks today. We've got more stuff on the way. I am really trying to make this show the best that I can, and at the end of the day, I can do all that I can, but I think I really need your guys' support. And you, the audience, you guys have been great at giving that support. So if you have any suggestions for topics, anything you want me to talk about, anything like that, please let me know. You can go onto my Anchor site anchor.fm. Let me just get it right. It's anchor.fm/Owen W-409, I believe. That is not right. I will get this out to you guys next time. But if you check out my Anchor site, which, if you're listening to this on Anchor, you can leave me a voice message. So feel free to leave me a voice message if you have any comments, any critiques, anything you'd like me to cover in the future, any notes. I'm always happy to hear it. I want to keep this kind of as a community. I want to have people bounce ideas back and forth off each other. I want to kind of talk about what you guys want to hear, because I think this is our show at the end of the day. But that's pretty much all I've got here. Episode 21 is coming up next. I can't guarantee when that will be. For those who don't know, I am a college student, so this is a lot to balance, but I'm happy to do it when I find the time. But episode 21, I will make a note on this. I have heard, I don't know how true this is, and I don't have numbers to back it up, but on another podcast I listened to, a great metal podcast, they had mentioned in an update recently that most podcasts do not make it past episode 21. So we are approaching episode 21. I think this proves the longevity of this podcast. It's been around for over almost 9 months at this point. And I'm incredibly thankful for everyone who's tuned in along the way. Anyone who's a new listener today, I thank you so much for tuning in. So be sure to tune in next time for what we got coming up next. I'll let you know what the topic is. I got it written down right here. Next week we are going to be talking about rock stars who are aging, getting older, some unfortunately passing away, and what that means for the future of rock and roll music as a broad topic. So I'm excited to talk about that one. I think that's a fun topic, and we could talk about a lot for that one. So that's going to do it for me here. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today to episode 20 of Owen's Rock and Metal Podcast, where we talked about Led Zeppelin's third album, Led Zeppelin 3. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and as always, never stop rocking.